What if America, the land of the free, came this close to becoming a dictatorship? What if some of the richest, most powerful men in the country secretly plotted to overthrow the president and install a military leader loyal only to them? And what if the only reason you've never heard about it is because they got away with it? This isn't a thriller, it's not fiction. It's a true story buried in congressional testimony, declassified documents, and the bold confession of a war hero. Welcome to the business plot of 1933, America's forgotten coup attempt. You've heard of coups in far-off lands, secret plots in fragile democracies. But what if the greatest threat to American freedom didn't come from abroad, but from within its own borders? In 1933, a group of powerful businessmen, connected to Wall Street, weapons manufacturers, and even former presidents, allegedly planned to topple the U.S. government. Their goal? To dismantle democracy, to install a fascist regime, and to use one of America's most decorated war heroes as their puppet leader. It sounds unbelievable, but one man exposed it all. Tonight on Tales Beyond Time, we journey into the shadows of America's past, where power, profit, and betrayal almost rewrote the nation's destiny. He captains of industry and the titans of Wall Street, Roosevelt's policies were heresy. They didn't see a savior. They saw a class traitor, a man threatening to undo the system that had built their empires. Whispers started to circulate. Roosevelt wanted to redistribute wealth. He wanted to empower labor unions. He wanted to tax the rich, dismantle monopolies, and give government control over private fortunes. To men who believed money equals power, this wasn't reform, it was war. And so, behind mahogany doors and within private boardrooms, a new idea took root. An idea so radical, so terrifying that it could never be spoken aloud in the light of day. What if Roosevelt couldn't be stopped by politics? What if he could be removed altogether? Not through ballots, not through assassination, but by something even darker. A coup. The very idea of overthrowing the President of the United States in the name of preserving capitalism was no longer just whispered. It was being planned. The men who wanted to own a nation, while Roosevelt promised hope from Capitol Hill, something sinister was brewing on the 30th floors of Manhattan skyscrapers. Not everyone welcomed the New Deal. Not everyone believed in democracy, especially not when it threatened their wealth. They were the untouchables of their time, industrial giants, banking elites, media magnates, and war profiteers. Their fortunes were unimaginable, their influence immeasurable, but what they feared more than poverty was change. To them, Roosevelt wasn't saving America. He was dismantling it, taking away the control they had built for generations. So they made a decision. If democracy dared to interfere with their profits, then democracy had to go. This wasn't just discontent, this was conspiracy. From the corridors of J.P. Morgan to the factories of DuPont, from boardrooms of General Motors to the weapons empire of Remington Arms, a hidden alliance began to form. A shadow network of powerful men connected by backroom deals and deep pockets shared a singular vision. The Republic is weak. The people are desperate. The military respects us. Now is the time. And they weren't wrong. Across the Atlantic, Mussolini had seized Italy, backed by business elites who feared socialism more than fascism. Hitler had risen in Germany, using fear, nationalism, and capital support to crush opposition. The American elite saw it happen, and some began to wonder, if Europe can do it, why not us? What they wanted was not a revolution, but a restoration of power to those who had always held it. But this time, it would be absolute. They envisioned a puppet president, a strongman, backed by a private army, answering only to them. But who could lead it? Who could rally veterans, command respect, and march into Washington without triggering civil war? There was only one name whispered in those smoke-filled rooms: Major General Smedley Butler, the soldier, the puppet, or the patriot. He was known as Old Gimlet Eye, a battle-scarred general, a Marine legend, and to millions of Americans he was a living hero. Major General Smedley Darlington Butler, two-time Medal of Honor recipient, former Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. He had led troops in China, stormed rebel strongholds in the Philippines, fought in Central America, and overthrew regimes in the name of U.S. interests. But Smedley Butler was no politician. He was something rarer, a man who could command loyalty, not with speeches, but with scars. He wasn't rich, he wasn't elite. He spoke like the people, and the people loved him for it, and the conspirators. They saw that as the perfect weapon, because what better figure to lead a coup than someone beloved by veterans, respected by the military, and trusted by the American working class? He wasn't a banker. He wasn't a Wall Street yes man. He was the opposite. And that's exactly why they wanted him. He gave them cover. He gave them credibility. In backroom meetings cloaked in secrecy, agents of the plot approached Butler. Not directly, never directly. These men knew how to move in shadows. Instead, they sent intermediaries, lawyers, businessmen, politicians with polished smiles and whispered promises. They told Butler he was the last hope of a dying nation, that Roosevelt had failed, that America needed a man of action, a leader to restore order. They offered him a blank check, $3 million in funding, 500,000 armed veterans from the American Legion, corporate backing, and a private militia with instructions to march on Washington. They promised he wouldn't have to fire a shot. "You'll walk into the White House," they said, "and Roosevelt will step aside. He'll stay on as a ceremonial figurehead. But you, General, you will hold the real power." They offered him a throne, but they underestimated the man they chose. Butler listened. He nodded. He took notes. But in silence, something burned behind his steel-blue eyes. A fury, a disgust, a realization. He had fought in banana wars and protected corporate interests his entire life. But this was treason dressed in silk. And for the first time in his career, Smedley Butler prepared for war on American soil, not as a coup leader, but as a whistleblower. The hero who turned the plot inside out. He could have stayed silent. He could have taken the money, led the army, toppled the government, and rewritten history as the man who replaced a president. But Smedley Butler chose something far more dangerous: the truth. With the eyes of Wall Street on him and the weight of a conspiracy on his shoulders, Butler knew one thing: if he exposed the plot publicly, they would deny everything. If he spoke too soon, he could be discredited, ruined, or even killed. But if he waited too long, they might actually pull it off. So he did what few would dare. He went to Congress. In 1934, Butler testified before the McCormack-Dickstein Committee, a little-known arm of the House of Representatives tasked with investigating subversive activity. The committee expected rumors, maybe wild exaggerations. What they got was an explosive confession, from a general with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Butler laid it out with chilling precision. He named names. He detailed meetings, money offers, secret instructions. He told them how the plotters had planned to recruit veterans and march on Washington like an American version of Mussolini. Blackshirts. He described how the conspirators believed they could control the government like a corporation, installing a figurehead and pulling the strings behind the curtain. And he made it clear. "I appeared before this committee," he said, "because I believe in this democracy. And I don't intend to sit by while a bunch of hi-hat fascists steal it from the American people." It was thunder in the chamber. The press picked up the story, for a moment. Headlines screamed, "Coup attempt uncovered." Butler says capitalists tried to topple FDR. But then, the silence began. No one was arrested. No one stood trial. The committee confirmed Butler's claims were credible, but took no action. Names were scrubbed from the final report. Key documents vanished, and the mainstream media, under pressure from advertisers and financiers, quickly turned the page. The American public moved on, and the men behind the curtain, they walked free. No charges, no questions, no consequences. Butler, once a war hero, was cast as a crank by the very institutions he'd protected for decades. Still, he never stopped speaking. He toured the country, warning crowds about the rise of fascism in their own backyard, and in private letters he wrote, "I spent most of my life being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism, but never again." How America buried its brush with fascism. What happens when a crime is too big to punish, too wealthy to prosecute, too connected to even name? That is exactly what happened after Smedley Butler exposed one of the most chilling conspiracies in American history. The coup was real. The evidence was credible. The names he gave were explosive. Yet, somehow, the story disappeared. The silence wasn't an accident. It was engineered. After Butler's testimony in 1934, the mcCormack-Dickstein committee quietly admitted, yes, there had been a plot to install a fascist-style dictatorship. Yes, it had been orchestrated by powerful businessmen. And yes, it involved real attempts to use veterans and military force. But then, the report was buried. Key names, like Gerald McGuire, the financial go-between, Grayson M. P. Murphy, the powerful banker, and corporate titans rumored to be linked, J.P. Morgan interests, DuPont executives, even members of the American Legion's leadership, were scrubbed from the public version. The committee never followed up. The FBI didn't investigate. The Justice Department filed no charges, no trials, no jail time, no accountability. Why? Because the men implicated were too powerful to confront. Because implicating America's economic royalty during the Great Depression could have ripped the country apart. And because some feared exposing the plot might undermine confidence in democracy itself, ironically giving the conspirators exactly what they wanted. So they did what the powerful always do when cornered. They closed ranks. Journalists were quietly told to move on. Newspapers that had splashed headlines one day went eerily quiet the next. Butler, once hailed as a national hero, was suddenly treated like a paranoid relic. A soldier too old, too bold, too willing to call out the men in suits who never fired a shot, but controlled the battlefield. The entire affair was reduced to a footnote, a political ghost story, and over the years it faded from textbooks, from classrooms, from memory, deliberately, strategically, completely, and yet the blueprint remained, a playbook for power brokers who wanted to bypass ballots, a model for how the wealthy could flirt with authoritarianism and walk away untouched. The shadows that profit from forgotten truths. When a story as explosive as the business plot is buried, it's not just history that's lost. It's power that's preserved. So who gained from the silence that swallowed this near coup? The corporate titans. The same men who plotted to crush democracy walked away unscathed. J.P. Morgan's banking empire stayed intact, DuPont's factories kept producing, and the arms manufacturers who had fueled foreign wars kept their contracts flowing. Their grip on American wealth tightened. They had stifled reform. They had neutered Roosevelt's boldest opponents within the elite. The political establishment politicians who might have cracked down on the plotters quickly realized it was safer to look the other way. Why risk angering powerful backers? Why challenge a class that controlled the money, the media, and the machine? Better to let sleeping dogs lie and maintain the fragile illusion of stability. The media moguls. Some of the loudest voices in print and radio were owned by interests connected, directly or indirectly, to the conspirators. Stories faded. Investigations stalled. The public's attention was swiftly redirected to sports, scandals, and distractions that kept the status quo intact. The public, unknowingly. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that everyday Americans never learned the truth about the threat to their democracy. They remained unaware that a coup had been plotted against their elected leader, that veterans were almost used as pawns, and that powerful elites had schemed to rewrite the nation's future. This silence allowed the seeds of distrust and cynicism to grow, making future generations question the very foundations of their republic. But the question remains: if the truth had been told, could America have changed course? Could democracy have been saved from lurking threats within? Or was this silence just another chapter in a story repeating itself through history, where power hides in shadows and freedom is the price paid for their secrets? The ghost that haunts American democracy. Though buried beneath decades of silence, the business plot left a shadow that still lingers today. It wasn't just a failed coup, it was a warning, a reminder that the pillars of democracy can be shaken, not just by foreign enemies, but from within. The plot exposed the dangerous idea that wealth and power could override the voice of the people, manipulate the military, and rewrite the rules of governance in secret. And while Smedley Butler's bravery shone like a beacon, the nation's collective amnesia allowed the very forces he exposed to continue shaping policy and society behind closed doors. In the decades since, echoes of the business plot have surfaced again and again. From fears of authoritarianism during the Cold War, to concerns over corporate influence in modern politics, to whispered conspiracies about shadow governments and secret cabals. The specter of the plot raises urgent questions. How fragile is the balance between democracy and oligarchy? How easily can power corrupt and corrupt power? How vigilant must citizens be to protect freedoms their forebears fought to secure? In remembering the business plot, we confront a truth that's uncomfortable but vital. Democracy is not guaranteed. It requires constant vigilance, courage, and sacrifice. Smedley Butler's story reminds us that even one voice of conscience can challenge the darkest plots, but it also warns that silence, complacency, and forgetting, these are the true enemies. So, as history turns its pages, the question remains: will we heed the lessons of the past, or allow the ghosts of the business plot to rise again? History never vanishes. It waits. There are moments in history we celebrate. There are moments we mourn. And then there are moments like the business plot, buried, whispered, erased, not because they lacked importance, but because they revealed too much about the fragility of power, too much about the arrogance of wealth, too much about how close America came to becoming something else entirely. In 1933, democracy stood on a razor's edge, and while the coup failed, the silence that followed may have done more lasting damage than the plot itself, because a forgotten lesson is a repeated danger. Smedley Butler may have stopped a dictatorship, but he could not stop the forces that worked to forget him. So what does the business plot teach us? That even in the land of the free, freedom is never immune to betrayal. That the battle for democracy isn't always fought in battlefields, but behind boardroom doors, in sealed memos, and hushed meetings. And that the most dangerous threats are the ones we're told never happened. As you walk away from this forgotten chapter of American history, ask yourself, what other truths lie hidden in plain sight? And what happens the next time, when no one like Smedley Butler stands up? If you liked this story, share it, talk about it, remember it, because some truths are too important to forget. This was Tales Beyond Time. Until next time, listen closely. History is still speaking.